All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to start the basics of metabolism by taking a look at Chapter 8. So, when we're talking metabolism, right, we're talking about all of the chemical reactions that exist in an organism. All right, so everything that you take in your body, or if you're an autotroph and you produce and then you use, all of this sums up to a series of taking certain molecules and converting them to something else, right? And to do that, that means I need to pull the atoms apart, put them back together, reactant to product, right? And so they're chemical reactions. But when we look at your metabolism as a whole, most things aren't going to be taken from a reactant to a final product, and that final product is what gets used in an organism. Instead, we end up seeing that most things are metabolic pathways, meaning I'm taking in one starting material, whether it's something as an autotroph I'm producing or as a heterotroph I'm consuming, and I'm going to go through a series of reactions to ultimately make the final product that my body can actually utilize. So these metabolic pathways tend to have many steps. Some are longer than others, some are more complicated than others, but there's good reasons for why these pathways exist. One is that most of the things that you are consuming, or even as an organism producing, we want to be able to control it. We want to have multiple pathways to feed things into that pathway to ultimately get the product that we want, or just be able to arrest or stop those chemical reactions somewhere along the way, speed them up somewhere along the way if we need to, based on the needs of the cell that are ever changing. So, most of these chemical reactions, most of these pathways also have a bunch of enzymes that are involved as well. So, in this one, this is a very simple pathway, 3 reactions. Each reaction, though, is catalyzed by its own enzyme. And again, throwing in those enzymes provides just another layer of fine-tuned control that the cells can use. When we look at these pathways, they typically end up in one of two categories based on what we're starting with and what we're ending with. And when we look at catabolic pathways, these are pathways that are going to take large, complex macromolecules and break them down into something simpler. Something like cellular respiration, that we'll talk about later this unit, takes those carbohydrates, those glucose molecules, and ultimately breaks it down into smaller components so that we can release energy in the form of ATP. So catabolic pathways break things down, and overarchingly, they are going to release energy. So if you remember the term you may have come across in chemistry as exothermic, right? They're releasing extra energy as heat. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Although we're going to use this term called endergonic to just specifically talk about energy release as opposed to thermal energy release, which is what exothermic is talking about. So cellular respiration is a catabolic pathway. It breaks things down, releases energy, and we're also going to throw that term endergonic out there a little later. How do I remember it? Cats break things, right? If you've got a cat at home, right, they tend to have a naughty streak sometimes, and so they have the propensity to break things, and that's what kind of helps me remember that catabolic breaks. Anabolic pathways are the opposite to that then. These are ones that are going to build things. So they may take something like that simple glucose molecule in a plant and turn it into starch molecules that they can store, or turn it into cellulose molecules that they can use as structural components for their cell wall. So anabolic pathways build things instead. But if I'm going to build things, that's going to require energy. And so these guys will consume energy from their environment. Photosynthesis is a great example of that. We're going to take oxygen, we're going to take carbon dioxide, I should say, take water, build those things up, and ultimately produce glucose out of it. and then they can build even further from that. Your body takes in the meats that you eat, breaks it down into amino acids via a catabolic pathway, but then turns around and uses those amino acids through protein synthesis and builds you new proteins. So that side of things would be anabolic. So we'll see that there's a lot of coupling of pathways where I break things down on one side only to use the products and the energy that I release from those catabolic pathways to then build things in those anabolic pathways. And the release of energy from the catabolic then drives the anabolic building side of things. If you've ever come across anabolic steroids, those were often taken by athletes to build excess muscle so that they were bigger and stronger and faster. They've got medical necessity uses, but that's one place where they were used illegally. But the whole point to anabolic steroids is to build muscle mass. So catabolic breaks, releases energy, and so they are exergonic. Anabolic is going to build, it's going to require the consumption of energy, and so we're going to use the term endergonic there. All right, what you may have come across in perhaps chemistry classes, endothermic, but we're going to simplify it just to talking about energy in general as opposed to the